Esperem una mica, no? Perquè ja sé que no ha arribat encara.
Sí, és com digueu.
Jo esperaria sí.
És que està una mica difícil de trobar. Tu mateix et fas.
Clar, perquè quan no hi veig cada dia, sí, jo he fet classes aquí, però quan no hi veig cada dia, la veritat és que a vegades... A veure si apareix algú per la porta, eh?
Jo em veig o no? No.
Sí, estaràs aquí, espera.
We'll start shortly in a few minutes.
Però ja estem live.
Ja els veig, que una persona correcta.
Podríem...
Sí, ves al Montse de Cal. Les normes aquí amb mascareta estan molt desvetllades perquè ja no hi torna a haver-hi govern aquí dalt, no perquè tornem a estar molt divertits, entre el d'aquí i el d'allà està tothom molt així.
Good evening. We shall start then. Please let me introduce Vicent Partal de Montesinos before he shares with us his thoughts on how minoritized languages can thrive in our mother world. Mr. Partal is a journalist born near Valencia in 1960. He's currently the director of VilaWeb, an electronic newspaper that not only brings us news, but he tries to make us understand the news. During his professional career, he has worked for several magazines and created and collaborated in many radio and TV programs. He is considered one of the pioneers of the internet in the Catalan countries. As a reporter and correspondent, he specialized in international politics and covered many key events of recent times, such as the fall of the Berlin Wall, the Soviet Union coup d'etat, the independence of the Baltic states, the Balkan War, the student-led revolt in Beijing, apartheid, the conflict in Kurdistan, or several US elections. In 1994, he created the first internet news system of the Catalan countries, of Temps Online. And in 1995, he co-founded the VilaWeb, the first electronic newspaper in Catalan, of which, as I already mentioned, he's currently the director. He has published several books on international affairs, journalism, and Catalonia. And over the years, he has collected many awards for his contribution to journalism, from an early City of Barcelona in 1999 to a more recent Valencian of the Year in 2015. Finally, he also is the chairman of the board of directors of the European Journalism Center, based in Maastricht, and an academic member of the Catalan Institute of Sciences and Humanities.
Hello, thank you for this invitation. It's always wonderful to be back in the city. When we were talking about this debate, my idea was that talking about Catalonia, of course, as you can imagine, implies a lot of things in these days because of the drive for independence, of the repression, of the political situation, etc. But we can discuss about anything you want after the short presentation. But my guess was that maybe, especially in a country like Ireland, where you have also a minority language, the Irish language, maybe it should be interesting, could interest you, what Catalans did for Catalan, and the discussion that we have in our country, which is very special, in my opinion. I didn't see this kind of discussion in other countries about being a global language, regardless of the number of speakers. So if you agree, and I hope so, I will do this short presentation first, and then we can engage on a debate on anything you want. I'm open to all kinds of questions, not only about language. The one discussion, when you start doing this kind of, something happens. Okay, let me start again. When you have this kind of discussions about languages, global languages, and for instance, in countries that have strong pressure from big languages like English here, or like Spanish and French in Catalonia, the first question to discuss is what really is a global language, because English, Spanish, French, this kind of languages, they already say we are a global language. You are not a global language. You are a minority language, and we discussed that conception, because what is exactly a global language? Well, if the number of speakers defines a global language, this is the global language. But I'm sure that in this room, maybe one of you could understand that. Probably none of us can understand that. So it's not, the number of speakers is not enough to define what a global language is. Geography and numbers of speakers doesn't define that, because if you have the list of the 5 biggest, most spoken languages in the world, you have Chinese Mandarin, you have Spanish, English, Hindi, and Bengali, and this is not the most global, what we understand as a global language. For instance, we believe French is more global language, Portuguese is more global language than Hindi or Bengali. So this is not the correct answer, geography of number of speakers. You know, the Irish Gaelic has been official full status in the European Union. So the discussion could be also, what is a minority language? We know what is not a global language, but what is a minority language? It's a matter of political status. It's a linguistic reality. all languages that are not international languages by definition are minority languages, and what implies being a minority language. That discussion in Catalonia took on the early 90s, especially the second 95 to 2000. There was a huge discussion about this. And the question was, is the process of globalization that is an unstoppable process, we cannot stop that, is this process cornering our languages, or we can use this process to become a global language regardless the number of speakers? So we don't want to be cornered on the idea that you have only, in our case, 10 million people speaking Catalan, or 1 million people, a lot of language in the world. We don't want to be cornered by the big languages, but instead, if we use the tools of globalization, then we can be considered a global language, or we are a useful global language. So in Catalonia, a lot of people believes that the adaptation to globalization is what defines a language as a global. Can you use the tools of the globalization or not? Can you use Apple, Facebook, Netflix, Amazon, Wikipedia, Google, Twitter? Are all these tools in your own language? Do you need to shift your language or not when you are using this kind of tools? If the answer is yes, you need to change. You need to use English or Spanish or French or whatever, then probably you are using a minority language. But if you, regardless of the number of people that speak your language, or regardless the status, the political status of your language, if in your daily life the big names of globalization accept you as a language, as a different language, then you are not a local minority language, but a global language. And I think this is the most interesting aspect of the Catalan discussion. When that discussion started, the big thing was to stress the fact that at that time there were the idea that this American globalization was a threat to local languages, and that local languages must take refuge, let's say, in old things, popular things, traditional things. The idea that languages have different uses if they were part of the global scheme or if they were not. Our point of view was that minority languages, in fact, need to participate in the globalization in order to survive. Of course, there are much more things than using global tools. Political scenario, the will of the speakers, the rights you have or not, that helps a lot in when you try to keep your language alive. But if you don't accept, if you don't think that you need to participate in globalization, that you need to be a normal language in the global world, then this is a major threat to your language, whatever it is. Even not only for minority languages in the political sense of the word, but for instance, in the Scandinavian countries, I remember when Yahoo decided to close the Danish, Swedish, and Norwegian sites, saying, okay, these guys doesn't need to use their own language, they use English. So even if you have your own state, if you are a majority language in your country, if you have all the rights in your country, if you give up, if you say, I don't need my language to be in the global world, then that is a threat, clear threat to your language. But also because all nations and all cultures have their unique place in the world. And again, regardless how big this culture is. in this island, music has been clearly part of this idea that the Irish music is all over the world as a unique thing that you produce, and but also contemporary projects are more interesting if they are based on something that is real, something that is very close to the people. 2 weeks ago, the Berlin Film Festival was won by director Carla Simón with a film Alcarràs in Catalan and without professional actors, using people, real people from the streets. That means that you can win one of the biggest awards on the cinema today, not only in Catalan, but because you are telling a story which is unique, which is different, and that's what minority cultures can do better than others. Internet has been a success story for Catalan. It was not clear in the beginning when we start working in the Catalan internet around '94. It was not clear if Catalan will be a success, if internet will be a success for Catalan or a disaster for Catalan. We didn't have a clue of what will happen. But the reality is that as the people embrace the internet and say, yes, we want to be here and we want to be here as Catalans, internet became a success story for our language that helps very much the importance of the Catalan language in our society. Let me just explain a little for those of you who doesn't know better so much Catalan language, because we have a very difficult situation, in fact. This is the map of the Catalan speaking area, but within this area, there are very different situations. First, we have Andorra, which is the only Catalan independent state. Catalan is the official language. Everything is in Catalan, but they are very few people. They are, I think, 200,000 or so. It's one of these micro-states in Europe. They are not part of the European Union, although they are part of the United Nations. So Catalan is a legal language in the United Nations, but not in the European Union. Then you have what we call the North, which is this area that is in the French Republic. This is Catalan-speaking people living in the French Republic. The area in yellow is because they speak other languages. It's traditional Catalan language area, but they speak other language. In this case, both in the north, they speak Occitan, which is a language that is only recognized as official in Catalonia. In the north, there is no legal status for Catalan because the French Republic still today believes French is the only language of the Republic, but things are improving very fast, and local councils are voting, supporting Catalan language presence, and also in the schools, for instance, even the French government is accepting the movement, a very strong movement for schools in Catalan. Then you have what usually you will know as Catalonia. It is an autonomous community of Spain, although independence, an independent republic was proclaimed in 2017. Then the Spanish violence stopped that republic to exist today. And Catalonia have three official languages. Have Catalan as official language, then Spanish, and then Occitan, because in the Val d'Aran, people speak Occitan, very few people. It's a Pyrenees valley, but the Catalan parliament and Catalan government always accept the right of self-determination from this valley, and that the official language in the valley is Occitan, not Catalan. Then you have two autonomous communities today in Spain, Valencia, where I was born, and the Balearic and Pitiuses Islands. Here, Catalan and Spanish are co-official languages. In Valencia, there is a big part of the territory, but very few people because it's almost empty. That traditionally they speak Spanish, not Catalan. Then you have what we call our West Banks. It's in Aragon and Murcia. There are two little areas where Catalan is also spoken, and no official recognition at all. It's not. There is nothing that can help Catalan there. And finally, we have the city of Alguero in the island of Sardinia, where Catalan is official at city council level and have the recognition of the Italian state and the Sardinian Republic. So we are a mess. This is a big problem for us because we have a lot of different situations. We have places where more or less Catalan have official recognition and the rights of a normal language, places where it is not, etc. And also in this level, internet help a lot because people living in every area can share and can interact with the people living in the others. What we did from the very beginning. What we did from the very beginning, when internet came around 1991, some people begin to think, how can we use this tool to help our language? And the first thing was to discover this algorithm. The Catalan is this. There is nothing but this. Catalan is, if you put any word here, and this combination, what came is Catalan. That was a job, an excellent job from linguistics and informatics. And they decided to give this tool for free to Google, to all the companies in the world, in order that they can identify easily what is Catalan. Of course, today there is much better algorithms than this. This is quite primitive. But anyway, that's a symbol for us. We did even shirts with that because this is the identification of Catalan. Every word here is Catalan. It was very difficult to differentiate Catalan from Romanian. The most difficult step was to differentiate from Romanian, but at the end, something came along that differentiate. And what people did from this moment was to embrace internet and to embrace technology without hesitation. So for instance, the Wikipedia, the Catalan Wikipedia, is the second Wikipedia in the world after English. And in fact, was the Wikipedia that gave to the Wikipedia America the idea that they can localize and have Wikipedias in different languages. And still today, it's one of the most influential Wikipedias in the world. Then we have a great victory also when we were able to have our own domain, .cat. That was a fight, very difficult fight, because the idea was moving the internet domain from Passport to Dictionnaire. But it was very difficult to convince the owners of the domain names. The ICANN, it's an American corporation, that it was okay to have these cultural domains. And .cat, the Catalan one, was the first one. That helps a lot to visibilize the community, because then you have tracks, you have advertising on TV, you have a lot of things with the .cat, and that creates a community. And it was also a very important step. It was very funny because the legal paper, the agreement with the .cat, is the first and only paper in the world that recognized that cats can speak Catalan. I will explain you want after, because there was a huge discussion that in fact we didn't want the .cat for Catalans, but for selling to cats. So the legal paper was, there was a discussion. I was absolutely shocked when the lawyers discussed these things seriously. But when the American lawyers say how we can prevent that you are doing business with cats, and the Catalan lawyers say, well, if the cat speaks Catalan, what happens? And I was, oh my God. And the American counterpart say, how do we know a cat speaks Catalan? And the logical answer was, if the owner speaks Catalan to the cat, then the cat understands Catalan. So the final result was that you can have a .cat page, because it's not only for Catalan language. If it is in Catalan, you can have cat photos in your website. It is not in Catalan, you cannot have cat photos. Well, it's interesting. And little by little, things were giving results. For instance, that was a moment that people loved very much when Twitter released a heat map of the Twitter uses by languages in the world. And the Catalan was making more or less the map with a lot of yellow here, some yellow here. So it was the final, we realized that we were able to create a community and that internet was interesting for Catalan. And then came what we call the 2050-100, which is as it follows. What we have discovered is that when a company, a brand, a government, institution, anyone goes into the internet and take the decision to be global, there is 3 steps. To be global in 20 languages, 50 or 100. Google Translate is more than 100, so not only Catalan, but almost every language fits there. Catalan fits, and this is a great victory, fits always when someone decides 50, and fits very normally when someone decides to have 20. For instance, this is the languages where the iPhone works. My iPhone works in Catalan, but if you take a look at the list, Catalan is the only minority language that is officially part of the iOS from Apple. And even there are a lot of official languages in countries all over the world that are not part of this list. Also, the same thing is with Android. So at the end, the idea is, it is not about the size, but about the use. And another good example is Icelandic. Icelandics are very few people, 250,000, but they are very attached to the Icelandic language. So they have everything in Icelandic. It's different of what happens with Denmark or Sweden, that they change to English very easily. The consequence of this is, if you change to another language, if you forgot your own language in order to be global, then the threat to your language is very real. But instead, if you keep your language, using your language on the technology, on the global, then for your language, this is a great success, because you play the league of the bigs. Even if you don't have your own independent state, even if your legal situation is not enough, etc. For instance, today, that's a map of some things. Facebook is in Catalan, Twitter is in Catalan, Tinder, Flickr, YouTube, Badoo, Messenger, Telegram, WhatsApp, Skype, Booking, Airbnb, Google Maps, etc. So there is this 20, 50, 100. When someone decides 20 languages, sometimes Catalan is there. When someone has 50 languages, then Catalan is there. When someone decides 100, it's there. And if indeed in those areas where the big players doesn't want to support Catalan, there is alternatives. This has been very interesting. For instance, this is filming.cat is like a Netflix, or Netflix, for instance, is not. They are now accepting subtitles and dubbing in Catalan, but very few films. But then these guys, Filming Cat, decided to start their own company, and you can find almost all, at least in Catalan subtitles. And they are expanding very fast. For instance, recently they are open in Portugal. They have a big business because of that. And that even translates outside the technology. For instance, when Time Out opened in Barcelona, they opened in Catalan. They didn't think to open in Spanish, because the success of the Catalan on the networks, on the internet, was so high that for them became something natural to open in Catalan. And I will tell you just an anecdote to finish. Parabologic is something that happened this Christmas. New York Times have one of the games of the New York Times, Spelling Bee, has been a success for a lot of years. So in my newspaper, we decided that we can do the same game, but in Catalan. And if I might say, better than the one that New York Times have. For instance, we have when you put the word, there is the definition. In the New York Times cases, it's not. That was crazy, absolutely crazy. We started that in Christmas. We saw, at one point, we saw 30,000 people playing at the same moment. That's a lot of people playing. And we have at least 1 million people playing once or another. And the success was so big that it was very funny that Football Club Barcelona, which of course, as you can imagine, is something like a religion, when they signed Adam Traoré, a new player, the campaign, the information that they were signing Adam Traoré was a Parabologic. Parabologic is this kind of thing. I was very happy because they put our brand also, so it was perfect for us, highlighting the brand of our newspaper. But they explained to the people that they was signing Adam Traoré by creating a fake Parabologic on Adam Traoré. What is nice with Parabologic is that a lot of people is playing in something that is young, is funny, is interesting. You learn, but at the same time, you feel like Catalan is modern, which is what in the beginning we wanted to create, this idea that Catalan is not an ancient language. No, Catalan is a modern language, is part of the global world. And I will try to finish by explaining 2 or 3 more things, more general, and then in the debate we can go further. One question is about Barcelona. In other countries, there is the debate of the big global cities. I think Dublin, more or less, is happening the same. I don't know if Belfast is the same. London, of course, is the same. These global cities full of people that speak a lot of languages that you don't really can say, this is my country, this is, I don't know, something global, something. And the discussion always is, it is good or it is bad to have this kind of cities. It is a problem that in the cities, there's so many languages are interacting, and that helps the more strong language or not? Or can you take something from this? And our answer is that it's better. I use this definition that Barcelona is the delta of the Catalan, is the place where Catalans go into the sea and expand all over. And just a recent thing, 2 weeks ago, Football Club Barcelona make an agreement with Spotify to for the shirt and the stadium, I don't know what else. Spotify is not in Catalan. It's one of the things that is not still today in Catalan because in fact it's only in English. But Football Club Barcelona put the condition that you must pay so many money and make available Spotify in Catalan and use Spotify to promote Catalan pop and rock and etc. So the power of these global cities can be used for good for a language. It's not only a threat, but can be used for good. Of course, you need people, in this case, in the club, the president, etc., he is aware of the importance of the power that the brand has. Second discussion is about media, because I think we are in a difficult moment, and we need to understand the place where we are playing. For instance, in our case, our newspaper, we define the situation as it follows. You have the big media, the big global media, New York Times, Al Jazeera, BBC, Le Monde, a few, not so much, a few. They are playing another league. You cannot compete with them. These guys have resources, have money, they can go worldwide. And then you have this small, highly localized media, people that works very well on proximity, etc., but they are little ones. They don't have the power to send people to other countries, etc., etc. We strongly believe that we need, in the middle, to have a position for media that, in any language of the world, can explain the globalization to the people. For instance, we in VilaWeb now, we are making, as you can imagine, a big effort about the war in Ukraine. We don't want that you need to go to an English language, French, Spanish language media in order to understand what is happening in Ukraine, because this is vital for every language. If you don't have enough information in your own language, then you are in danger, especially because if you don't do that, they will do. BBC, for instance, is broadcasting in a number of languages. It was because imperial reasons in the past, especially BBC Radio. But now they are understanding that they can do it for having impact, global impact. New York Times, for instance, now is writing articles already in 4 languages. But I was told by people of the Times that they intend in the future to print New York Times in at least 40 languages all over the world. If that fits on the 25, 50, 100 scenario, sometime that will mean that you could buy the New York Times in Catalan in Barcelona. So, but that's okay. The only question is that the mind of the writers of the New York Times is not Catalan, is not European, is not Mediterranean. So there is some danger inside this proposition. But I think all media, especially in countries that are not the biggest one, all media must understand that we need to invest a lot on global information. If not, it will be very difficult to stop this process of homogenization of the information all over the world that is really dangerous. Probably you will, sometime you read this quote. There is a lot of people, I don't know why, that say this is from Noam Chomsky. It's not true. This is from Max Weinreich. Max Weinreich was the man that creates the first Yiddish grammatics. But for some reason, people believe it's Noam Chomsky. It's not. But Weinreich, at one point, he said, a language is a dialect with an army. That was extremely clear proposition. That means what makes you a language is the political power. So you are a language because you have political power. And to some extent, this is true. When you see that in Bosnia today, they say the Bosnian language, when Croatian, Serbian, Bosnian language is the same language, but they distinguish the language because political reasons. To some extent, this is true. But I remember I saw in 25Ds, the language is a dialect in all operative systems, in all OS. And I think that is much more adequate to today's world. It's important because if you don't have political power, you are in danger. But even having political power today is not enough for any language in the world. And finally, just to open the debate, if you want, language and nation are very close. And especially in countries like Catalonia, now we are in this process for winning our own independence. The relationship between language and nation is a very close and intensive relationship. But the globalization is changing our world. So we need to define again what is nation, how a nation works. And my idea is that we have at least 4 points that are becoming more and more real every day. First, our nations will be less uniform, but more cohesive. So it is not in the past, someone different was a stranger. Today, that is not true, not necessarily true. And if the nation is more cohesive, if they work to integrate people regardless of their familiar language, their background, their religion, their etc., that nation will be stronger than the ones that try to keep the old idea that only the ones that looks like me, speaks like me, and eat like me, they are my nation. The second, of course, every nation needs to have power to order their own society. But in the past, the translation of this power was the state. Today, it is not clear. The state, of course, is important. That's the reason Catalans want their own state, our own state. But it is not enough. And for instance, on the Ukrainian war, we are seeing something really interesting. It's one of the things that they're making me think a lot, is this, the way the big, how to say that, the big civil powers, Apple, Microsoft, Coca-Cola, McDonald's, powers that have power by itself are being part of the world. For instance, I remember when McDonald's opened in Moscow. I was working at that time in the USSR, and the first McDonald's in Moscow, it was, for Russians, it was like, it's hard to imagine from our perspective, but for them was like the most incredible thing that could happen. Yesterday, McDonald's closed all the restaurants in Russia. Apple say they stop Visa, stop the credit cards. So these powers that are not political powers in the traditional sense of the word, they have a lot of power today. So we will need to organize our society, and we will need power, but probably not only political power, more than political power. Then there will be this challenge of having a large multilingual capital. This is difficult. Barcelona is very clear, but I can imagine much more London. When the Brexit, for instance, here in Scotland, Wales, and London voted against the Brexit, because they are different countries, and London is a different country. London is not exactly England. So this challenge on how to accommodate vibrant communities, big cities, multilingual cities into your own nation, I think is one of the most important things at all. And finally, you need to be recognized as a player in the globalization. This is, you are in or you are out. There is not any chance of having middle position. Either you play on the globalization league, either you're out, and then you will have a lot of problems. So that was my introduction to the debate. It's, I think that is something that Catalans has been working a lot this 20 years, 30 years about this concept of doesn't fear the globalization as a culture, but use the globalization to become a more up-to-the-day language, a more modern language, a more attractive language for the people. And after that, we can discuss of anything you want. I'm open to your discussion. I don't know how to order the thing. Anyone who wants to talk, and we just discuss. Okay.
So I'm going to organize so we want to, I guess, at some point take a look and see if there is any questions from online.
Yeah, I didn't see
But
any. I
okay.
didn't see any coming in.
but maybe we can start from the room and then
Let's do it from
see.
the room.
Yeah.
Okay,
Sorry.
thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I have a thought of a question of the concept of a global language. The impression I have is that literature plays a big part in being considered a global language, because when people think of Italy, Italian, French, first thing is because they can think of a writer on the language. And we have a very good tradition as literature tradition in Catalan, an impressive one. But I don't think we're breaking the state barrier. I don't even say we're not even breaking the autonomous barrier. I go to a bookshop in Spain. I don't see Catalan authors translated in Spanish. I'm struggling finding Catalan books in English to share with my partner. So what can we do? Because we have a good power, editorial power, publishing power as well. But I don't know, is there something here that we're missing?
I think this is changing a lot, and there is a lot of translations from Catalan books to a lot of languages. Let me just point to cases. Jaume Cabré is a great novelist. He used to say that he is a German novelist who writes in Catalan, because he sells millions of books in the German translation of their own Catalan books. Or, for instance, now one of the authors that is now very much followed in the United States, and there is a lot of interest on her, is Mercè Rodoreda. There is a publishing house in New York, I think, or Chicago, that is publishing the works of Mercè Rodoreda, and it's becoming a success. And New York Times, for instance, dedicates a full page a few weeks ago to one of the books of Mercè Rodoreda. The same case with the cinema, this Alcarràs film that was winning the Berlinale. I think there is, the big question is, English-speaking countries, for them it's very difficult to use another language. To some extent, French also, but I think that the people that need less to have a different language are the English-speaking languages. So they have this tendency to avoid literatures that are not the ones that, by definition, are in the top 5. Of course, you cannot avoid Petrarca, you cannot avoid Cervantes, you cannot avoid Molière, and that's it. But the case then is the same for Hungarian, for Norwegian, for Catalans or for Kenyans that worked in Swahili. So, and this trend, in my opinion, is changing very fast because of the cinema. Because more and more people loves to go to the cinema with subtitles. Not because it is easy, but because the value of the sound, of the original sound. And that is changing the idea in the English-speaking countries. It's changing the idea of that other languages can produce very interesting things. And this is changing also the perception of literature. But it is a process, we need time. The global society is something very new. It's, let's say, 30 years. And we are still learning how to cope with this multilingualism. But for instance, very few days ago, Netflix was explaining that the most successful films in Netflix were in Swedish, Norwegian, and Hebrew, because Israel is producing a lot of good series. So, and especially the young people, not the old people is more reluctant to subtitle, but the young people, they are all time watching films on original language, etc. And that, my impression is that that will change also the perception of literature. Also in music is happening, that people is more and more accepting other languages in music. For instance, even France will send to Eurovision this year a group singing in Britain, in one Gaelic language in Britain. In Spain, it was impossible because there were groups singing in Galician that won the popular vote, but then Spanish television said that not. The singer from Spain must sing in Spanish. This is the very old idea that Spain have of their own languages. But more and more you have people singing in other languages and are accepted by other cultural communities. So in my opinion, this is improving. It is true that in the past was that way, but I think it's changing very fast.
As you were saying, as technology has changed the playing field for languages, I was thinking as well that technology is going to change the languages very identity. People are allowed, for example, multi-layer identities. I can be still a Catalan here, reading the news from the web, playing logic, but at the same time, I watch every kind of these news.
This is an interesting question. How people is accepting more and more that we have plural identities, that there is not a single question that identifies us, but that we have different layers, different identities. And what it is interesting, in my opinion, is that the global society is more and more opening the field to accept any kind of personal decision. And this is quite interesting. And will be in the future, I think in the future will be kind of a solution for a lot of political problems. For instance, I was born in the 60s in Vetera. When I was born, I was Roman Catholic. If today I want to be Muslim, no one here will say nothing. No one, in fact, no one will, as much someone will ask why, but there will be no one will punish me for becoming Muslim. And this is happening still in some areas of the world, and was happening in our own country not so far ago. I was born as a man, but if today I say I'm a woman, even legally speaking, no one will care about this, and they will accept. I can change my gender and become officially a woman, and nothing will happen. No one will put me in prison. And when I was born, if you were homosexual or you were in risk of prison. So it's happening very fast. But I was born Spanish and I want to be Catalan. And what happened then? When that happened, they sent me the police, they put my leaders in prison, they sent my leaders to exile, they declare constitutional laws, they do everything in his power to stop me. Well, this is a matter of time. It's absolutely stupid, because if I can change my religion, I can change my gender, why not? I can change my nation. Where is so much different on this field? And I think the international community is becoming to understand this thing. For instance, there is people like, there is a lawyer, and well, a lawyer, the man who creates part of the Bosnian constitution and who were the prosecutor on the Milosevic trial in The Hague, Timothy Walters. He is just publishing a book called Vox in Pandora, where he defends the theory of that the international community needs to create an organism from the United Nations that allow people to change borders in order to accommodate their will in a democratic way, because if not, we have Ukraine. If not, we have the risk of a nuclear war. If not, we have a lot of violence. For instance, his proposal is, okay, if you want to be independent, United Nations must have a group of people that monitor all this kind of situation in the world. There must be a very clear process. You must win 2 elections in a row and then win a referendum, and then you will become independent, but then you need to accept the same process within your country. So if there is people that want to leave your country, they must have the right to leave. So it's like a puzzle, and will take 20 years probably, but it will be better than the current situation when we have violence all over. This process has been already put in work in Switzerland. One of the cantons of Switzerland, Jura, was make secession in base of this process with all the referendum, the cascade, the referendum cascade, they say. So in my opinion, this is an interesting and very good process, because at the end, there is 2 things that more and more in the liberal countries, at least, on the sense that people say to liberal countries, more and more are accepted. One, the definition of yourself depends on yourself. You don't define me, okay? And the second, democracy is the basis for changes. So what Spain tried to stop when Catalans did the referendum, won the referendum for independence, proclaim independence, and they used violence to stop the independence process, probably in some years, it will be seen as a very old way of deal with these ideas of we have different identities, and we must find a way to conciliate all the identities. That means that probably inside Catalonia could be people that doesn't want to be Catalan, and then will do their own referendum. If they win the referendum, they will not be part of Catalonia. Or I imagine the same problem here with the North and the South. Maybe the borders will change and there will be areas that will remain part of something different. But at the end, democracy and respect for identities is something that more and more the international community is understanding, and the way the big companies are working also illustrates that. Why Apple or Google why they invest so much on localization, because that means paying a lot of money. You have, I can't remember the exact figure, but if probably I'm wrong, but something like 25 people working in California in Catalan inside the Apple headquarters. These are the Catalan cell. They take care of everything Catalan related on Apple. And you have, so in California, people from several languages all over the world. This is a trend. I think this is something that the old powers cannot stop. Yes. Amazon have very few languages. If you keep in mind this idea is the 20, 50, 100 per year. When someone only have 4 languages, they are wrong. So they move when they, because they will not take the decision, put Catalan here. They will say, put the 50 languages. And someone will decide which one are the 50 languages. And the 50 languages are the 50 languages of all the people that have 50 languages. And as Catalan already is there, it will be much more difficult to be outside and try to be in. But as Catalan is already there, they will not discuss never about Catalan. They will discuss about 20, 50, or 100, or 5.
Follow up on what you just said. So if we are essentially kind of at the mercy of these big companies that are kind of shifting the move towards localization, isn't it another form of globalization? I mean, Amazon, okay, producing it's or selling things in Catalan, yes, but it isn't. Don't you think it's kind of allowing for the local texture, local taste, local styles to disappear?
Absolutely, yes. Then
I mean, it's a new form of globalization in my mind.
Yeah, there's a distinction between globalization and imperialism. There is some imperialism, American imperialism in this case, in most of these companies. But to fight against that, you have the politics. For instance, Belgium is making a law now, is discussing a law in the parliament, and in my opinion is the first country that is doing that, that prevent Google Maps and Amazon to operate in Belgium. So they are trying to forbidden Amazon in Belgium. Poland and Hungary, I think, they make a law forbidding the companies to use Google Analytics. So there is things that are happening in this field, and I think very interesting ones. But again, you need to understand that this is quite new for all of us. It is 30 years, but really globalization really is coming in the last 15 years. So we are just accommodating to this process. The first step of this accommodating has been, okay, we have a lot of things that we can do that we can't do before. The second step is, let's see what's wrong with this. And then you have politics. You have the parliaments, the governments can stop or can try to force these companies to work in a way that doesn't disturb the local companies. And I think this is really important. But again, the fact that you are part of the globalization, you have your turnaround. You can have a little company, there is plenty of cases of that, a little company in Belfast that can be a global company in some very, very strict area of knowledge or producing something. But I think also it will happen sooner or later that the political powers will regulate these imperial companies, because if not, the economic consequences and the social consequences are not the best. So I hope that that will happen. I'm following very close the Belgium case, because if Belgium say you cannot buy from Amazon, that is a shock. That is something really important.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting lecture. I was thinking about the comparison with Gaelic, that Catalonia, the Catalan language has been surviving for such a long time with, despite the repression and not having a state to protect it. And yet Gaelic had the state to protect it for a long time, and it didn't succeed. So I think that is something very puzzling. Nowadays, I'm not wrong, I think 10% of the population, or many, speak the language, but they don't use it ever here in this country. And yet Catalan never had a state to protect the language of the country. So I find there must be something about Catalan which is different to other languages in the world, because it is really very similar and unique.
Maybe it's part of the fight. I'm not sure. I'm not an expert on Irish, so I have very few ideas about this language. But maybe the fight for your own personality, it's important. I remember I just 2 weeks ago I published a book called Borders, that is about 37 borders I cross in my life in very strange places. And the first one is like a little stories. And the first one is about Belfast, because I was very surprised some years ago when I came to Belfast again and walked into Falls Road, and I found this church, this red church, very big church in Falls Road. Go inside, now it's a cultural center, and all of a sudden people was speaking Irish inside this church. And then I went to a local pub, very close to this local pub, and people was speaking Irish. And I didn't remember people speaking Irish in Belfast before, never. So it came to my surprise, and I understood that there was a way that they changed the checkpoints by the Gaelic, the Irish. And to my surprise, when I came back to Dublin, and I say to my friends, Irish friends, how excited I was about Gaelic living in Belfast, they told me, why this is important, what happened, why they speak Gaelic. And I was very surprised, because from a Catalan perspective, you cannot think on this kind of reaction. It's come on, guys. It's the national language. Why are you talking? So I don't have a theory. I don't understand why the Gaelic language is as it is today. But probably because some of my friends, especially journalists in Dublin, told me about this. The people, a lot of people in Ireland believes Gaelic is an ancient language. It's not a language able to be functional in a day by day in the modern world. And if this is the case, and I'm sorry again, I'm not an expert in Irish, if this is the case, can illustrate how different it is from Catalan. Because the fight from Catalan is that Catalan is a language able to be used everywhere today for every kind of activity you have. And maybe this is one of the first steps that you need in any language today, that people doesn't identify that language as an ancient language that is not useful today. I insist, I don't know if this is the case of Irish Gaelic. I'm not sure about that, but maybe this is one of the reasons of this different idea. Of course, also the fact, for instance, that in Belfast some people speak Gaelic is a way of reivindication, is a way of saying we are Irish. In Catalonia, the rise of the internet and the technology has been parallel to the rise of the movement for independence. So there is the possibility that the language is part of a political movement, or if the language is part of a political or social movement, not necessarily political movement, it is much more easy than to survive that if it is not. And maybe because of that, some people in the north want to use Gaelic, and my impression is that very few people in the south want to use Gaelic because they already have their independence, already have their own state, and doesn't care about the language. But I insist I'm not an expert on Irish, and this is only my opinion.
Sorry, just to add something to that. We all back from Cork to the south, and Irish speakers out of the Belfast. Just
Can you speak a little louder?
sorry, yeah, just Irish speaker from Cork to the south, currently living in Belfast. But I guess your points about maybe some of the reasons why there's kind of identity or indifference, I guess, in the south Irish, I would agree with that. So people tend to think that separating politics and language is by default a good thing, but actually sometimes it can be, by linking them, it can be good. So I guess similar to the Catalonia situation, maybe Irish in the north, in the sense that it's an expression of identity and politics as much as anything. You know, that's a good or a bad thing according to them, but I think that might be why it's kind of a little bit more different in the south. Because as I mentioned, the stage is already there. It's kind of just seen as something that, yeah, just, I guess also from maybe just, kind of thinking with Catalan and Irish, why Catalan might be a lot stronger is because the speaker base is a lot stronger. So with Irish, because the cultural movement is sort of increased, it seems to us seen as a revival, and that, the idea was the whole country would speak Irish again. In reality, it was the speaking rate was quite low, and because it's a rural sort of situation for many lives, I guess it's kind of more you have to temper your expectations for the revival. I mean, of course, I'd love that everybody spoke Irish in Ireland, but the fact it's still a living language, even in some rural areas, I think is actually a bit of a success, considering in the north as a state, the areas of Irish speaking where it was the traditional language have died out under the state because of the suppression of the state, I guess. So you have those two things, right? Politics, if you use it to fight back, it's good because it gives you an identity, but also if the state is against it, yeah, it can.
That doesn't happen all over the world. There's countries that have their own language and that they revitalize. It's happening a lot in Africa, for instance. Africa was divided into colonial powers, and the decision of not changing the borders implies that the languages of the new states always were the colonial languages, English, French, Portuguese. And so now this is changing because languages like Swahili and Hausa are becoming more and more national languages. Because in the Philippines, it's the same case. Filipino was a language that was almost not doesn't have any formal use. Some people doesn't consider it a language, but revitalized. So it's I understand it's what most people tell me about Irish Gaelic, but it's a particular case also. It's not happening in parts of the world now.
Traditional speaking areas are under pressure and to benefit in raising families in urban settings, but those parents aren't first language speakers, so linguistically is quite interesting as a case study. But yeah, for sure, in the traditional areas, it's different. So I guess every case is that's
History makes the situation.
Would it be all right to close the microphone?
I'm sorry.
Those
I'm
of
sorry.
us who are
Forgot.
joining online.
I forgot the microphone. Sorry very
So,
much.
is there a question here?
Yeah, I wanted to ask, going from a minority language to a global language, what do you think are the strategies? I mean, you mentioned like Wikipedia. You say Catalan is the second most. Just wondering what does a minority language have to do?
Yeah, I think, well, the first step is to have people speaking it and using it. And so digital communities can, especially in languages that have geographical distribution, that it's few people in everywhere. The creation of digital communities and some kind of media that help these people to unite, it is important. I remember some years ago, someone, I don't remember very well who, told me about the idea, what's the word is Galchak? Galtech. Someone told me the idea of creating a digital Galtech. I think that's a good concept. The idea of having a place, a digital place, where every Irish-speaking can interact with other Irish-speaking people. And there is a lot of tools on the internet that can help to create these kind of things. To me, media, in the internet, media is really important. You don't have any media. It's very difficult because media is what people goes day by day. I remember there were a newspaper here in the North La, that was a newspaper in Irish Gaelic, but there is not any newspaper in Irish Gaelic in the South again. And Vilaweb, for instance, it's not a paper newspaper, but today is one of the most important brands in Catalonia. So maybe you don't need to have a paper newspaper in Gaelic, but instead you can create a Vilaweb in Gaelic, sort of. And to me, the most important thing is to reunite the people, because the problem with minority languages is that at some point, people begin to think he or she is isolated, and it's alone, and it's against the others. So it's really important to have these places where all the speakers can freely do everything they want. For instance, for us in Vilaweb, it's very important, the expats communities. I remember the first time that we were broadcasting live the Canada elections in Catalan, and someone from Toronto told me this is crazy concept. I'm voting as a Canadian, and I'm following in Catalan the results of my voting as a Canadian. Well, this is important. These kind of things are important because people need to use the language on a daily basis. That's the most important thing for every language, and especially for minority languages. So probably the most interesting thing would be to have this kind of central point. Maybe it exists, and I don't know. I said that I have not much more idea about Irish Gaelic. Maybe it already exists this kind of project, but this idea, I think it should be interesting, understanding that the electronic media is not enough. You need real people, and you need to have real people speaking. You cannot build a community from nothing, let's say. But for instance, now it's there is this artificial intelligence translation, automatic translation. That would be a major step if you are on the top or not. I have a daughter that speaks Chinese and live in Taiwan, and I was able to speak with the taxi driver, I speaking in Catalan on the phone, translating to Cantonese. Okay, this is quite different, and probably in very few years you will not need your own phone. Maybe you will have some earpiece and you will speak in a language and the other guy in another different. I was coming from Dublin now in a car that have the operative system in Catalan. So I was driving in Catalan through the Irish roads. The question is, if you don't create enough, you need to have a base that can help you to be part of all these kind of things. If not, that will be very difficult for any language, regardless it is an official language or not, will be extremely difficult to survive. But I don't know if something like this already exists in Ireland.
So there is a comment online about the politics, Irish and Catalan comparison, I suppose. So the audience says, Irish entered regression before it entered the period where administration, taxes, pre-modern powers started. Catalan started to suffer when Inquisition spread as a reaction to the movable type press. So it's not a question, but
no, it's an explanation.
Yeah,
it's an explanation. It's possible an explanation. The Catalan was surviving. Probably one of the reasons Catalan survived is because Spain was not able to do their job well. For instance, Catalan is the most difficult place in the Catalan area in France than in Spain, even if this is changing very fast. But in part, this is because the Spanish state is very inefficient and they cannot create the modern idea of nation. This concept of the Irish language being in problems even before of the modern period of times could explain a lot of things about why the situation of Gaelic is the one that you have today. I think it's an interesting position.
I have another question, but it's to do with your views on the political process in Catalonia, but I'm aware of the time, so maybe later on over a cup of coffee or something, you want to talk if it's a bit late for people, or maybe other people have questions. This is my second.
Getting close to the hour, so maybe one more question. Yeah.
When you said about this time Canada following election in Canada for Delaware, I was thinking that it is sometimes important because following the same news in a different Delaware, you're going to see the same news but from the point of view as one as yourself. It's the same news, but it's the interpretation of this news is different. They are complementary, not necessarily antagonist. And therefore, following the news, following the elections of Canada or the US elections, both in the BBC, the CNN, and Delaware, provides, I think, a great understanding. If we go to the end where you said Al Jazeera New York Times. That's what the practical landscape.
I think it's closer to you. It's what your own language media can give you is a more closer view, because you share the same way of understanding the world. And this is very difficult in a global scale.
All right. Do we end it?
Like you paint a very positive picture of the you paint a very positive picture of the Catalan language, but I mean I have lived here for a long time, so but for what I hear from my family and yeah, a lot more that they talk about young people when they go to YouTube videos, even though they are Catalan, they will do that in Spanish because that's the way they think they are rich or whatever. So they, my nephews, like they would speak more Spanish than I have spoken. It's, yeah, my family has a lot more especially as well with the way that it's being replaced.
Yeah, this is the half glass discussion always. Catalan is having a lot of problems now from, I think, from two major questions. One is the globalization is having a strong impact in Barcelona, more than in the other cities, in Valencia, but especially in Barcelona. And what is happening in Barcelona today is a trend that is happening, for instance, in Brussels or in Montreal. That is that part of the immigration, when arrives, they shift to the politically powerful language. For instance, Montreal was a city where the rich people speak English and the normal people speak French. And now there is a lot of immigration that speak English, and this is making Montreal people very nervous. In Brussels, Dutch is almost finished because people try to speak in French. It sounds much better than in Dutch. In Barcelona, that is happening with Spanish, and there it's. You may know that in Catalonia, the autonomous community of Catalonia, it's 7.5 million, and in the last 20 years, 1 million immigrants came. So it's a lot of people. And these people, they first speak in Spanish in Barcelona, not in other cities, but in Barcelona that happens. And that makes the impression that the city is becoming more and more Spanish. And it's true, you hear more and more Spanish. But as I am a Valencian, this is nothing new for me, because I'm used to have this feeling. When I was a boy and I went to Valencia, I was surprised how much people spoke Spanish. And by the years, I learned that this is not a fatal ending process. For instance, today in Valencia, people speak much more Catalan than when I was a boy. And so I think that could be the case in the future. I think we are in the game. I have not a pessimistic view. What it is sure for me is that if we didn't do this job, we will be in a worse position, for sure. Then the second problem is the violent repression by the Spanish state. That has been always, more or less has been always, because when after the so-called civil war in 1939, the new regime, the Franco regime, was a regime that one of the most important basis for its ideology was a very strong Spanish nationalism, a version of the Spanish nationalism that was openly fascist and was absolutely against Catalan, Basque, or Galicia. When Franco died in the bed, and Franco was appointing the king, there was this kind of miracle of the transition, that at that moment, most people in Europe believes that it was something magical, how a country came from a democracy to a dictatorship without blood, etc., etc. That was a fairy tale. There was blood, a lot of blood, but it was silence, and Spain didn't become a democracy. Just accommodate in order to be accepted as a part of the then European communities. When in 2010, the Spanish Constitutional Court broke the pact between Catalonia and Spain. And after that moment, the movement for independence started. And one of the things that the movement for independence provoked was that the Spanish nationalism was again, as it was, let's say that the Spanish nationalism was trying to not to be so open as it was in the past, because Europe could be afraid of that. So for instance, for a long time, they say there is not far-right parties in Spain. It was false. There was far-right people inside People's Party. But now, after when the Catalan movement asked for democracy, asked for the right to vote, asked for the right to become an independent state, Spain's reaction was the Francoist reaction, because they were the same people. They were the courts were the same courts, the police were the same police, the culture, of course, they were not the same people. Sometimes they were even the same people, but the courts, the police, and the top civil servants of the Spanish state, all of them were educated or living on the Franco regime. And the idea they have was, okay, you are allowed to do something, but if you want to go further, then we will react not in a democratic sense as any other European country, but on an authoritarian way. Most of you probably saw the pictures of the police on the referendum, or know that there has been 4 years in prison the leaders of the Catalan government, or in exile. What is interesting today is that part of the government went to exile and began to fight in the European courts. And they are winning battle after battle, because the constitution today is not the Spanish constitution or the Irish constitution, but the European constitution. And the European constitution, I disagree a lot with the European Union. There is a lot of things that, in my opinion, are very bad in the European Union. But the courts defend freedom, and that's right, and we experience that. Because every time something is arriving, the court is condemning Spain. And this is introducing a different frame, very interesting frame. And now we are in a very special moment, because there is two discussions in the court that probably before the summer will allow President on exile Carles Puigdemont to come back to Catalonia, and Spain will detain him. So will be the moment where the European law will be finally broke by the Spanish state, and that will have consequences, not because they love Catalans, but because they are applying the legal system. And especially because now with Poland and Hungary saying that the European law is not more important than the national law, the European institutions cannot accept what Spain is doing with the Catalan process, because at the end it's very easy. What Catalans are asking for is democracy. The referendum was for understanding if there were a majority or not in favor of independence. And this is just democracy. And everyone agrees that if there is a majority, and now it's a majority because even in the elections, the pro-independence parties are winning by the majority, not only of seats, but votes. If this is the case, then there must be a negotiation. Must discuss how to change the status of Catalonia to become a republic. The only problem is that for Spain, this is unacceptable. And they believe that using violence, they can stop this movement. And this is anti-European. So I understand that on the short run, on the little picture, people is being disappointed because it has been really difficult watching so much violence against Catalans. But on the long run, the picture is very clear that the problem is on the Spanish side, not in the Catalan side.
Well, thank you so much. This has been so enriching for me. Thank you for organizing. Thank you for joining us. And people online, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to you.
Allow me just to close. Just before you leave, I would like to say as well, thanks to everybody who attended here. Thanks to the people that attended as well online. And we have to apologize for the people that attended online that we couldn't pass the microphone to ask the questions. But hopefully we capture this. As well to thank Sultan, I think Monse, which did a fantastic work helping to organize. The guys in ANC in Northern Ireland, which as well helped a lot. So I hope you enjoyed it. I mean, I think it's always a pleasure to hear Vicente. And just to mention that we're going through a tour. We're going to be as well in Cork and in Dublin, just to follow this series of conference, which is a pleasure to have here. My pleasure. Thanks. Thank you very much.
Not very much.
Gracias. Un plaer.
Igualmente.
Gracias.